All right. So what are hormone receptors? A receptor is a protein, and we know that proteins are expressed from genes. So if you have a functional receptor, you best have a gene that is not mutated or damaged. Where can you find a receptor for a hormone? You can find it either in the cytoplasm, or you can find it embedded in the plasma membrane, or you can even find it on the nucleus. Therefore, although in the picture here we do see that the receptor is sticking to the plasma membrane of the target cell, but remember that the receptor can also be in the cytoplasm or on the nucleus. Now, proteins are folded, and when a protein that is acting as a receptor is folded, it has a binding site. And when a hormone binds to its receptor, it's a perfect fit. It's like a fit between a glove and a baseball. And when a hormone binds to its receptor, it alters the physiology of the target cell. That's the ultimate goal, remember. So the take-home message here is that I want you to understand that receptors are not only found on the membrane, but they can also be found in the cytoplasm or on the nucleus. And the ultimate goal is to change the function of the cell or to change the physiology of the cell. Moving on to types of hormones or classification of hormones. Okay. Now, hormones can be of three basic types. The first one that we will talk about is steroid hormones, and know that all steroid hormones are lipid derived. They are derived from lipids. Then the second class is protein or peptide hormones, which are made up of long chains of amino acids. And I want you to know that the protein or peptide hormones are the largest class of hormones. Then we have hormones that are derived from a single amino acid. Those are called amine hormones. And tyrosine, hormones like dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, these are derived from a single amino acid called tyrosine. And these hormones, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, together they are called catecholamines. And I also want you to remember that thyroid hormone is actually an amine hormone. It is derived from the amino acid tyrosine. But thyroid hormone behaves like a steroid hormone. So although thyroid hormone is derived from the amino acid tyrosine, remember it behaves like a steroid hormone. And we will understand why in a bit when we actually talk about the structure of thyroid hormone. All right. So, three types of hormones. Steroids, which are always lipid derived. Then we talked about proteins and peptide hormones, which are long chains of amino acids, and know that they are the largest class of hormones. We also talked about some hormones that are derived from single amino acid. Those are called amine hormones. Examples include the catecholamines, which are derived from tyrosine, and thyroid hormone is also derived from tyrosine. Good? Now, this is showing us synthesis of amine hormones. So on top we see tyrosine, which is an amino acid, and by the action of multiple enzymes, tyrosine is converted to dopamine. By enzymatic action, dopamine will be converted to norepinephrine, and again other enzyme will work on norepinephrine to convert it into epinephrine. So what do we see here? From the single amino acid tyrosine, we can derive dopamine, norepinephrine, or epinephrine by the actions of different enzymes. Also in red, we do see that thyroid hormone is derived from tyrosine. Therefore, the key point to remember here is that although thyroid hormone is derived from a single amino acid tyrosine, it behaves like a steroid hormone. It behaves like a steroid hormone. Okay, so let's talk about some more about steroid hormones. Now, steroid hormones are synthesized from a precursor, cholesterol. They come from cholesterol. And when we see these ring-like structures in the steroid hormones, as we see in the picture, these are steroid hormones like aldosterone, cortisol, estradiol, progesterone, and their structures have these rings. Now, these rings actually tell us something about the behavior of the hormone. It tells us that these hormones do not love water. They hate water. They're hydrophobic. But they love lipids. They're lipophilic. Now, if you are lipid derived, you don't like being in the watery plasma, right? And lipid hormones and steroid hormones, they need to have a carrier. They need a carrier protein that can envelop around them and protect them and afford them more water solubility. They have longer half-life, meaning they long laster in the body and they are not readily cleared or filtered out by urine. Because they are lipid derived, they can also cross the cell membrane, and their receptor is most likely found in the cytoplasm or on the nucleus. They are going to target changes in gene expression. The fastest acting steroid hormone can change the physiology of the target cell in about 45 minutes, which is actually pretty remarkable. Alright, so steroid hormones and thyroid hormones have their receptors in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. And in both cases, they are going to change the expression of the genes. We will get new proteins being made and other proteins being shut down. Moving on to thyroid hormone. Now, I want you to understand that thyroid hormone is a quirky hormone. It is derived from the single amino acid tyrosine, and yet it behaves like a steroid hormone, as I mentioned before. The reason why it behaves like a steroid hormone is because of its chemistry. Now, if you look at the thyroid hormones, there are two diagrams or two pictures of thyroid hormones. And you do see that it has a benzol ring. Therefore, although amino acid derived, it is not water loving. It will need a carrier in the plasma. So it is amino acid derived but wants to be like a steroid. Remember this, and this is one of my favorite questions on the exam. Okay, so we will see how a lipid-soluble hormone like steroid hormone or thyroid hormone actually enter the cell and change the functioning of the cell. So we on top, if you look at this diagram on top, we do see a blood capillary. We have the red blood cells floating, and then we have some hormones in the yellow balls. Now these are lipid soluble hormones. So these hormones can actually cross the plasma membrane and enter the cytoplasm. Now in the cytoplasm, the blue receptor is present. So the hormone binds to its receptor and the hormone gets into the nucleus. So the hormone crosses the nuclear membrane and enters the nucleus and physically binds to the DNA, causing change in transcription and translation and protein synthesis of the cell. So this is how lipid-soluble hormones like steroid hormones and thyroid hormones work. The good thing is, although they need a carrier protein to be transported via plasma, they can cross the plasma membrane and actually enter the cell, because lipids can be dissolved in lipids. Remember, like dissolves like. So the plasma membrane has a lot of lipid, which actually helps these hormones to be transported inside the cell. Okay, moving on to water-soluble hormones. How water-soluble hormones affect the physiology of the cell. Now remember, the amine hormones, the peptide hormones, and the protein hormones are all water-soluble in nature. They don't need carrier protein to be transported via plasma, but it comes at a cost. These hormones, so on top you do see a blood capillary, and the red RBCs are floating around, and you see a yellow triangle which represents a water-soluble hormone. This hormone comes and binds to a particular receptor called G protein. Know that G protein is an integral membrane protein. It's an integral membrane protein that remains embedded within the plasma membrane. Now, water-soluble hormones do not enter the cell. They bind to the receptor, and that starts a cascade of reactions called second messenger system. So what do we see here? We see that the binding of the hormone to the G protein activates the G protein, and the activated G protein then activates a protein called adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase catalyzes conversion of ATP to CMP, which is the second messenger in the pathway. Now CMP then activates protein kinase. Do you see the brown thing is protein kinase, which is activated by CMP? And the activated protein kinase then catalyzes conversion of ATP to ADP, and the phosphate thus released is used to phosphorylate some proteins. And obviously, these phosphorylated proteins will alter cell activity. So the key point here, water-soluble hormones, they do not enter the cell. They bind to G protein receptors, and they activate the G proteins, which in turn activates adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase converts ATP to CMP. CMP in turn activates protein kinases, and the activated protein kinases then catalyzes conversion of ATP to ADP and phosphate. The phosphate is then activates other proteins, and that helps them to alter cell activity. So this is second messenger system, and this is how all water-soluble hormones work. Okay, so this is just talking about what I just explained in the picture. So I'm not going over this. You can all read this PowerPoint, and these two processes that I talked about are quite complex, and please do email me or post on class discussion board if you have any questions on these two processes of hormonal actions. I'll stop here and then start with a third video.